Let's go.
Welcome back to Micromobility. We have with us today Kyle Doerksen from Onewheel. Kyle, pleasure to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Big fan of the podcast, so happy to finally be on here.
Yeah. Oh, hey. Thank you. Yeah. And I'm really stoked we've finally managed to track you down and get you on. Look, I mean, for folks who are kind of new to this, I mean, I know of the Onewheel. It's such a unique vehicle in this space. I'd love for you to just tell us maybe a bit about it first, and then we can get into this sort of backstory of how it came to be.
So Onewheel, if you've seen one riding around town, is sort of a electric board with one big wheel in the middle. It's actually a go-kart tire with a motor inside it and active stability. So it's actually balancing you. And so you just lean a little bit towards your front foot to go and lean back to slow down. And, now there are tens of thousands of them in the world.
Yeah. The thing that's always struck me as quite interesting about them is that they're very, they look like snowboarders, like the way that people look when they're riding them look like snowboarders, and they're quite different from the other unicycle style vehicles where you've got the foot, you're facing forward rather than facing to the side. I've never actually ridden one. I'll admit, I look at all that stuff. I ride a scooter. I'm terrified of safety with the scooter as it is. So I kind of look at Onewheel and I'm like, oh, and unicycles probably more so than you guys. But yeah, like, how did you even come to do this? I mean, it seems like such a kind of weird vehicle in the first place. Like, what was the backstory to it?
Well, the inspiration for me was definitely snowboarding. I grew up in Western Canada near the Rockies, and snowboarding on powder is this amazing experience that I love. And then I came to study at Stanford for college, and, a little farther from the mountains, but still you can get up to Tahoe in 4 or 5 hours. At least you could then. Now it's like 8 or 9 hours, as there are problems with mobility, as you've discussed. But, that feeling is just amazing to me. And I wanted to have that feeling all the time. And so, which to me, skateboarding didn't really have that sensation. Skateboards, you have little hard wheels. You feel really connected to the ground. Whereas when you're on, your snowboard on powder, you feel like you're flying, or you feel like you're on a fluid surface, basically. And that's the experience I wanted to create with Onewheel. And so it was actually something that I was tinkering on nights and weekends. I worked as a design consultant at IDEO after I got my master's in mechanical engineering. And, but I'd spend my spare hours trying to, make this dream a reality. And so I got some, go-kart tires and motors and put them together, and originally tried to see if I could do it without self-balancing, which of course is impossible. Figured that out pretty much on day one, and then realized, okay, I got to use control systems, which I had a little bit of familiarity with from studying in my master's. Built a version 1 prototype with an Arduino and a big, motor from washing machine or something. It's a batteries from security lighting, big lead acid batteries at the time. This is around 2008 or so. But after some time tinkering, I got it going and was able to ride down the street, and put a few of my friends on it, and they were like, wow, this is awesome. Can you build one for me too? And then I actually had to put it back on the shelf for a little while because, the tech wasn't really here yet to make the kind of experience that I wanted to, where it was really elegant and integrated. Needed to wait till the in-hub motor technology was available, and lithium batteries got to the point where they could be small and light. A lot of the enabling technologies that you talk to your other guests about. Also, the MEMS, gyro, and accelerometers. 2008, I mean, that was like the early iPhone. People were amazed that when you flipped it, your photos would flip around. And, I could see that technology was going to get, more sophisticated, and the gyros, which really allowed it to, move significantly past what accelerometers could do on their own, were just starting to be integrated. I think the ones I had on my prototype cost, $80 or $100 each, and subsequently over the next few years, those dropped to pennies because of the volumes of smartphones. And so, fast forward a few years, we launched the product in 2014.
And so, because there's so much to unpack here. This is so cool because it is exactly the sort of story that we would expect of, right? In our thesis for micromobility, which is that the low end kind of modularity of components come together. You must have been doing this earlier than Sanjay, doing boosted and that, but by the sounds of things, you ended up launching vaguely around the same time with actual products into the market.
Yeah, I think I was tinkering on the concept a little bit before them. We were both students at Stanford around the same time. And then they were kind of looking at it from the drone technology, the small outrunner motors that people were using in drones. And they realized that, electric skateboards were due for, reimagining them with this new kind of powertrain. And I was looking at it more from this control systems perspective. How could you take what, usually when you study control systems in school, it's to build applications like, flight computer for a missile or, some kind of exotic defense application. And I thought sort of what's the swords into plowshares type of application here where we could use that for fun, instead of destruction. Really wanted to build something that it had the sense that it can only work because of the technology, right? It seems impossible. And that to me was really one of the most compelling things is that you could build a totally new form factor of a vehicle using active stabilization and in-hub motors, which, just hasn't existed before. While I was at IDEO, I helped spin out an electric bike company called Faraday Bikes.
I remember Faraday. They had the two tube top with the they were gorgeous bikes.
Yeah, double top tube, so, with that, we were taking a familiar form factor and adding a motor to it. And really, we were an early design leader in e-bikes. The e-bikes at the time were very rough. They were like a, nylon bag with some huge batteries on the back rack of a cheap mountain bike. And that was what an e-bike was. And it was very much a kind of DIY fringe type of movement. And we said, hey, we need to make an e-bike that appeals to bike snobs because they're the ones that will pay the kind of prices that e-bikes command. We're some of the first to hide the batteries in the frame tubes and build something that most people could look at and not know was an e-bike, which was really our goal there. It was a super cool product. We won some design awards and commercialized that. And that's really where I got the bug for micromobility. And then, wanted to take it sort of farther, into building something that, like I said, just really could not exist without these new technologies.
And so, because you kind of skipped over it when you said, like, I went and parked it and then all of a sudden we launched the product in 2014. I am very curious about what happened between, like, when you parked it and what happened in 2014. Because, you were at IDEO, sure, whatever, but, there's a company formation story in there, which is, I can imagine, talking to others who were in the micromobility space, that story of what happened in the 2010 to 2014 space or 2015 space, it's just, it was brutal. Like it, by the sounds of things, in terms of being able to raise money for hardware and thinking about building a company in that space. And, you're obviously there when Alta was being born and all these other companies, Lit Motors was raising, etc. Like, can you talk me through what that was like to be in there trying to build a company in that time, in that space?
Yeah, I mean, so we launched on Kickstarter, and as had a couple of other, we launched Faraday on Kickstarter as well. It was kind of the golden age of Kickstarter, right? It was still pretty early. Optimism was high. Now there's more backlash and people are more skeptical of projects, but there really were a lot of amazing companies birthed out of that era of Kickstarter, where the crowdfunding allowed you to solve this chicken and egg problem of customer demand and investment, right? The investors want to see customer demand, but you can't create customer demand until you go start marketing it and build it, which needs investment. And so how do you crack that? And Kickstarter was one of the things that we used. Fortunately, I was able to do a lot of the early R&D on my own because of my background in engineering to get it to the stage that we could at least fake it well enough for a Kickstarter video. And that's what we had in early 2014. And then off of that, raised some early seed investment but really navigated a course where we could use that seed investment to hire the initial team, build the first production runs, but not really fall into the traditional kind of VC funding stages, because I had observed a lot of hardware companies that had failed at the Series A level, Series B, Series C. And it just, to me, there seemed to be this lack of fit, really, for the VC model and consumer hardware, which everybody is still trying to make sense of on kind of both sides of the table. Like, how come sometimes it works phenomenally and other times it just doesn't? But I think, I went up and down Sand Hill Road and, talked to all those guys. And at the time, this was just after Juicero had raised, and they said, "Oh, we just invested in our favorite hardware company we've ever seen. It's this thing; it makes juice, and there's this
not only makes juice, it really just pops a bag and like puts some water in it, and we got juice. Yeah.
And so that was the flavor of the month. Micromobility was not yet something that was on investors' radar, certainly. And it was challenging to raise. Ultimately, we did get some additional investment in the door, so we could keep building and work our way to the next levels. But because we were sort of bootstrapping and operating with somewhat limited reserves, it forced us to be smart about supply chain, cash flow, and all those things that hardware businesses really need to wrap their arms around early, because those are the problems that if you try to make them up with scale, you dig a deeper and deeper hole.
Yeah, totally. It's actually fascinating talking to other entrepreneurs in the micromobility space, including one of my favorites, David from Wheel, who when I asked him, I was asking a couple of them, I was like, I'm going to be interviewing you, and what should I ask him? David's just like, look, Kyle's just like a legend. He kind of like that in the sense of, you raised money early, but then you were like, it doesn't make sense. There is not a good match between VC and what we're trying to do, and so you've tried to build a company that's independent of that. And I think that's a really, having watched the space develop a lot, and like how that level of independence, the ability to be able to build a company that obviously is a little bit more resilient in that space, and not so reliant on that external funding, is just really, really cool and really special. So I just wanted to congratulate you on that. But was that a necessity more than anything, or was that a kind of conscious choice in terms of how you thought about building the company?
It was a pretty conscious choice. I mean, I'd seen, like I said, these sort of VC flameouts. I mean, Juicero, maybe a year after all the VCs told me it was the greatest thing ever, and they'd raised 100 million or something, they were gone, right? It just, you can burn very brightly and spend a lot of money really fast in hardware. And so I wanted to build a little slower because, also with hardware, the barrier to adoption in our case, at that point, was a $1,500 price point. It's not an app that people can download for free and you can figure out how to monetize later. This is you need to get people over that hump, and because there's that price point barrier for people to get in, there's a certain adoption curve that people there's going to be some people that on day one are like, yeah, I'll pay extra to get it early, and those are the people that are on Kickstarter. But then to actually get the word of mouth sort of flywheel spun up with people saying, yeah, I got one of those and it's really awesome, and here, why don't you try mine? And maybe you should get one too, and then we can go riding together. That all takes time, and more capital can't really just shove that along.
So I'd love to kind of dig into the vehicles. I feel like we've talked about a lot of other things but the vehicles at this point. So you obviously have one model in the beginning. Now you've got multiple by the looks of, as far as I understand, including kind of a mixture between off-road and on-road or commuter versions. Take me through that. Like what vehicles do you have now, and where are they finding markets?
Yeah, so we have two models, the Pint and the XR. The XR is sort of from the original lineage. We had the original Onewheel and then Plus and then XR. XR can go, up to about 20 miles on a charge, up to 19 miles an hour, ride on and off road. And then a couple of years ago, we introduced a lower price model called the Pint, which is smaller, lighter. It doesn't have as much range, but is also a really awesome ride. And we wanted to get under $1,000, so that one's at $950, and the big one XR is at $1,799.
Yeah, awesome. And of the people who are like, can you? I take you don't reveal sales figures, as most people in the space don't. But which one sells the most, and who are the people who are typically buying them, and what sort of use case are they buying them for?
Yeah, like you say, I can't really disclose too much about our sales figures, but both Pint and XR are very popular. I think that the market, there is a significant high-end market, and there is a significant more casual market. I think that's one of the things that has struck me building this business is, not only is it these technology building blocks that have enabled this, a sort of golden age of micromobility, but it's also DTC e-commerce, right? And the fact that you don't need to convince one buyer at one huge retail chain that they need to carry your product. You can convince, a few buyers over here and a few over there, and they can buy it on your website. And that allows you to build something that doesn't need to, solve the needs of 100% of people, right? You can say, look, there's 10 or 20% of people that love doing things outside. They love snowboarding. They, if it's active and adventurous, they're in. And those are our people. Yep. Should my grandma get a Onewheel? Like, no, it's not designed for her.
Totally.
But it's for a group of people, and we're able to effectively find and connect them online, and now increasingly offline too.
Yeah, and take me through that, because you've got the offline component. It's one that I feel like is really important, and yet in many ways it's really hard. And so what was the strategy that you've used for distribution? You started obviously DTC, but the reason I ask this, I have friends in New Zealand who have Onewheels, and they've kind of, they swear by them. They're like, they're really cool. But I've never been to anywhere where I can buy one. Like there's no shop or anything like that I can go trial it at, and I haven't had a chance to go try theirs yet. So I'm still in that space of like, yeah, interested, but probably haven't had a chance to try it out yet.
Yeah, global distribution is one of the things that we're still working on. We have a decent number of pickup points in Australia, but not really in New Zealand yet. We're working on our first few. Yeah. But yeah, so one side of that is the retail network, and we've got lots of dealers in the U.S. and some in Europe now. Where you can go, and most of those locations you can test ride a Onewheel, which is key for a lot of people. They really want to, taste the experience before they, commit to that kind of expense. And then, but the other thing is just the community of Onewheel riders, and they're, initially we helped, sort of broker those connections through online forums that we hosted. And then they subsequently took the discussion to Facebook groups and other places, and meetup groups and group rides, which now we have an app that connects to your Onewheel, and within that you can actually plan and find group rides. And there's some big group rides, 100, 200 people sometimes, which is really amazing, seeing the photos from those. Usually it's more like 10 to 20 people, but really all over the world now there are Onewheel group rides. And it's like you get into this new activity and you're like, wow, this is really fun, but I'd love to do it with other people. Where do I find those other people? You go online, you say, hey, are there any other riders, wherever you live? And people get together and ride together, because the social element is significant. And you see that with cyclists, you see that with motorcyclists, you see that with, other forms of transportation where people really, get together and, want to do it together.
That has been one of the things that I've really admired about your company and the way that you've done it. And similar to like Boosted, I think did a really good job of community building around kind of like quite a niche vehicle. And the other one as well, because you had that one, like you have obviously those rides, but you also had the Onewheel event where you were doing like that. Was that a hill climb or like it was an off-road version? I saw it.
So we're doing racing. So we've got the Onewheel Racing League, and that started, very grassroots. We were out in Colorado at the mountain games, And we're an exhibitor, and we said, hey, what if we just sort of on the slide just laid out a little course here in the town square with a couple of cones, and people could race around it, mainly people from our company, because there weren't that many one-wheel riders out there yet. And so we did that, and lo and behold, all these people came and stood around and took videos on their phones. And so the next year we built it a little bigger, and the next year we built it bigger, and then they were like, hey, you can't actually do this here anymore. You kind of stealing the show. So we went on, and now we're hosting events on ski resorts in the summer. And this year we had 3 regional qualifiers, and the big Race for the Rail is coming up.
Yeah.
And of course, that's another place. Racing is a thing that you guys talk about, whether it's automotive or other micromobility stuff that's happening now. But anything, human nature is they want to go race it, right? And,
especially with these vehicles as well, because it's just they're fun. Yeah, the big one we haven't actually had. We covered them off in the Micromobility World Conference, but I haven't had them on the podcast, and I really should do it. Is the e-scooter folks who are trying to build, like, their scooter's got 100 k's now. It's bananas, the stuff that they're talking about doing, and it's obviously pretty. I think a really exciting space.
And on the one hand, that's not for everyone, and frankly, like, I couldn't even probably make it down the one-wheel race course that these people are going absolute top speed on. But it's it's inspiring, and it also pushes us to develop a better product, right? And it pushes riders to develop their skills, and of course raises the profile of of what we're doing.
Yeah, well, it's like free content for you guys, right? If you got a heap of people going out and generating some amazing stuff. I watched the video of the Race for the Rail from last year, where they had like some of the helmet cams. I was like, they're going banana. What felt like banana speeds to me on what it feels like it's just a go-kart wheels strapped to an electric motor.
Yeah, those are the best riders in the world for sure. Yeah. Which I think is another interesting concept, right? Is like, there are, take scooters, right? I don't really talk about so-and-so being a great scooter rider, but I do talk about so-and-so being a great one-wheel rider. And there was this, from the beginning, we had to decide, is this thing a toy? Is it a sport? Is it a vehicle? And we really said we want it to be, a sport and a vehicle. And so everything we've done is chasing that way. People ask us, are you going to make one for kids? Like, no, that's not really like the focus here. We're trying to make, the most advanced, vehicle that we can, and, connect with people who love sort of pushing the limits and taking it farther.
Yeah. Kind of going into that as you think about it, right? That the one thing that as I sort of mentioned, I still look at that and go, man, this feels a little bit, it looks like it's got a bit of a learning curve to it. I didn't, the fact that it's got the stabilization systems in place and all that sort of stuff, it still strikes me as being, from someone who's looking at it going like, oh, that looks like it's challenging to ride. How do you counter that learning curve and kind of getting over that hump?
Yeah, I mean, really, the number one way is to go try one. Find one of your friends that has one, and wear your helmet and go have a go on it. It really is significantly easier than it looks. If people have tried other board sports, learning to snowboard, it takes 3 or 4 days of just falling so many times to get the hang of snowboarding. If you've ever done any surfing, I mean, it's really a lifelong pursuit. It always humbles you. One wheel is really like you're going to learn in a couple minutes. And I think it looks much more intimidating than it is. And so we love doing events where demos are available, because you just get all shapes and sizes of people that realize, wow, this is actually totally doable. And so with COVID and the pandemic, we had to obviously cut that whole program, but we've done pop-up shops and demo tours and things like that, and really getting on the board is best. And similarly at our retailers, most of them, you can go demo the board and try it. And yeah, it's just a couple of minutes, and the interesting thing too is there's a bit of a double standard, right? Because nobody knows how to ride a bicycle until they learn how to ride a bicycle, right?
Yes.
You remember what age you were when you learned. I was 5, but everybody remembers that moment. And at first you're like, there's no way I can ride a bicycle. And then eventually you learn and it clicks. Onewheel is significantly easier than that. It's just that most people already know how to ride a bicycle. So we get to bring that experience of learning to ride a bike for the first time to, in many cases, adults that are learning how to one-wheel for the first time and like reactivating those parts of their brain, the joy of learning something new. And then you get it, and then you're good to go. And that's, people ask, is this recreation or transportation? And really it's both, but it kind of sneaks at it from a recreation side. Most people are going to get aboard, have fun with it, and then they're going to realize, oh, I could ride to the shop on this thing. Oh, I could actually commute on this thing. And that's kind of the direction that this goes.
You're saying all this, and I'm like, damn, I gotta get me one of these because I take where I live at the moment. I take a train to into town, and at the moment I take my my boosted rev scooter down to the train and hop on and do all that sort of stuff. Like, there's no reason. Actually, that would be even easier because it would mean I can go and sit down and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things too. Having done e-bikes in the past, is that there's actually some non-negligible friction at either end of an e-bike journey, right? You have to lock it up. On the train, at least where we live, there's designated cars and there's only so many slots for bikes. And if it's full, you got to wait for the next train. And, if you lock your bike outside in Santa Cruz, where we live, or San Francisco, and it's a $3,000 e-bike, good luck with that. It may or may not be there when you get back out. Oh, it starts raining and you want to, switch to an Uber to go across town. It's difficult or impossible if you have a bike with you. Whereas with the Onewheel, it's like inherently multimodal, right? You can pop it in the trunk of a car, you bring it with you on the train, you bring it in with you when you go to your destination. For me, being a train commuter for a while, that was always daydreaming about having a Onewheel. That was before we developed it, but that was one of the things for sure that led to it.
And that for me, like when I think about it, the reason I love taking my scooter, I have an e-bike too, and I don't take it anywhere. I kind of ride it around and then I come back to my house. Mm-hmm. But I take my scooter with me because I can hop on the train. I'm not constrained by the limits of how many. So you can only take up to 3 bikes on each train. And so you kind of turn up to the station not knowing if you're going to be able to hop on whereas my scooter, I hop on, no problem. That means
you don't know when you're going to get to your destination. And that
exactly.
means,
It's about planning and all those sort of things. And so that's why I love the scooter. And I can also go and take my scooter into everywhere that I go. And I've had one place, I think in like the 2.5 or 3 years that I've owned it, who sort of said, no, you can't bring it in here. But otherwise everywhere else is like, yeah, no, we don't mind. It's not a big problem. And I think, that nanomobility, I think there's like a whole category of micromobility we kind of need to go and redefine in some ways, Horace and I, around the idea that there's something that's like really all the time with you. There's the movement of going from having like a laptop or a tablet to a phone, equivalent, and just you always have it. And it's so small that you can kind of get around with it. That's fascinating. And like you mentioned as well, by the way, kind of COVID-19 and the impact that COVID's had in terms of your the events and things like that you're doing. How's the rest of the business been? Like, how has it taken off? Has it flatlined? Anything you can reveal in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were affected in the same way that a lot of companies in the outdoor space and the owned micromobility space were probably affected, where there was starting in the spring with lockdowns, there was actually a lot of demand for our product. And of course, all that demand went online because none of our retail channel was open, and so our online store was doing brisk business, in the spring and summer of last year. And really what it did, as it has across the e-commerce industry, is it advanced that curve, several years past, where it was originally, because you get, more people using the product. Each rider is a mobile billboard for the product. And, the sales side was really, really strong. Logistics were challenging. Our factory, which is in San Jose, California, we're one of the only domestic U.S. manufacturers of small electric vehicles. that was closed for a while. You probably saw Elon tweeting, to the county government his dissatisfaction with having to shut manufacturing. We were sort of affected by that same thing. So, we were able to get things back online and hustle to keep up with demand through the rest of last year. Overall, it was a challenging time for everyone. Obviously, it's hard to make progress on a lot of other things, but in terms of the top line and demand, it was very strong last year.
Yeah, and talk me through that, because I think that the fact that you've got a US manufacturing plant is an interesting counterpoint, especially because we know that Boosted obviously went under, I think in part because of everything that happened with the Trump tariffs and impacts on supply chains and things like that. Like, you could have obviously manufactured these anywhere. What was the motivation for you about wanting to do this locally, and what's the impact of that been?
Yeah, well, from the get-go, there were two main reasons that I wanted to build, close to home. And one was intellectual property. So I had seen this story play out many times where a startup had gone overseas to do manufacturing of a first-gen product. And by the time they were even shipping theirs, there were direct knockoffs already shipping, often that's, you're teaching your contract manufacturer how to build your product, better than you even know how, right? If you're using that model. And so I knew I didn't want to do that. That was not a failure mode I wanted to, find myself in. And the other is really cash flow. So, the reality of working with an overseas contract manufacturer is that you need to send them a lot of money in advance. Then they make your product, then they ship it. Then it takes a long time to ship to you. And then eventually it gets there. Hopefully, knock on wood, you don't have any issues with that batch. Otherwise, you need to rework them at tremendous expense. And then you ship them to customers. And so because this is a several month-long process, even longer now because shipping times are very slow, you're having to decide things about volume and product mix, really far in advance. And if you guess wrong, you're screwed. You either have way too many or way too few, and nobody's happy. And so with building, in California, which we've done since the beginning, we're literally like building a Onewheel the day that the order is placed on our website and is shipping out, that afternoon, which is a huge competitive advantage. And then subsequently, about 2 years ago, before we launched Pint, we actually brought all our manufacturing fully in-house. So we had been working with, contract manufacturers here in California, but now it's fully in-house. And that was another big step up to really see manufacturing not as, a necessary evil, but as a core competence, right? Something that the better you get at it, the more it can, help improve your business, your product, point to the new technology innovations you should be chasing down and all that kind of stuff. And so, it's a huge task, right? That's why most startups don't do it. They have their hands full with raising money and generating demand. They gotta, outsource some of it. But, we took, our time getting to that point. But now, we have all our manufacturing and logistics is under our own roof.
That's very cool. Where does it get to for you in terms of components and stuff? Because obviously there's been, I hear the stories about Tesla and everybody and all the all the car plants are currently shutting down because they can't get chips and all that sort of stuff. How much of your supply chain? So the assembly I totally get, but if you're talking about all the components and stuff, if they're still coming from overseas, how much does that impact on your ability to manufacture?
Yeah, that's a mix, right? There are some components that only come from certain places, right? And there's a lot of disruptions in those component supply chains right now, from batteries to, semiconductor components. And, we're, navigating all those now, as is everyone else, but really it's the flexibility to, flex your inventory up or down. If you can build a board, the same day that's ordered, that's one extreme. The other extreme is, you can bring in a lot more parts and, kind of stockpile if you see that the supply chain is getting disrupted, right? So that you can, get continuity of supply even as, certain challenges arrive. So we actually have a lot of space devoted to, raw materials warehousing so that we can, keep those at those kinds of levels. But I think everybody is struggling from the global supply chain situation right now in any kind of advanced technology. There's just radically more demand. And interestingly, I haven't seen this documented too much, but part of the reason for that is that suppliers are trying to move up the value chain and move up the innovation chain. They're making the leading edge semiconductor node to make the latest new high-end processor or GPU or whatever, and that comes at the expense of making the more bread and butter electronic components that have been unchanged for 10 years. But you actually need those components to build almost anything. So it's good for them because I'm sure they get more margin on a leading edge processor. But the problem is those products can't be completed without some of those key components. Same with batteries, right? You're seeing companies that were making sort of general purpose batteries actually closing the factories and shifting into building electric car batteries in different form factors. So not only is demand tight, it's actually decreasing in some cases. Supply is decreasing because they're repurposing factories to go chase the electric car market. And so, you'll see this play out, I think, a lot in the next year or two, where there's sort of a generation gap in some of the technology.
Yeah, fascinating. I'm looking forward to unpacking that more. I'm kind of curious, like, as an OG of the space, you've seen the development really of this right from the kind of get-go, right? Which is you're playing around and playing around with what felt like probably a toy at the time and turned into something that's obviously a product that's being shipped to tens of thousands of people. But what are you most excited about in the micromobility space? And where do you think that we're going to go? I mean, Horace's thesis, it sounds like you're a believer. Where do you think that kind of logically takes us?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely a believer. I think that, where it logically takes us is that everyone has a personal light electric vehicle, at least one. And I think they probably have at least one that is owned, and they may use some shared as well. But that is really the landscape, right? So when I said that a few years ago, I think everyone's going to have some kind of personal light electric vehicle. People were like, "You're insane." But now it's totally reasonable. You're going to have a Onewheel, you're going to have an e-bike, you're going to have a scooter, whatever suits your needs. You're probably going to have one, and maybe more than one, right? And the unbundling of the car is a real thing. We can use material, energy, space on our streets, space in our houses and apartments much more effectively than cars let us do. People have ridden over 50 million miles on Onewheels, which, as far as I can tell from public data, is like more miles that have been driven by autonomous cars, right? Like the billions that have been poured into that. And so micromobility is one of those things. It's like here today, it's happening. Not everybody has quite realized that it's happening yet, but it certainly is. And those exponentials are well on their way. You guys cite many of them on the show. I think one area that I'm not quite sure about is, like, I don't think there is an iPhone of micromobility. I don't think there is one vehicle or form factor that will be dominant and get 70-80% market share. I just think that, it's never been the case in, transportation, right? You go to the car dealer, they have small ones, big ones, pickup trucks, which Horace hates, and, smart cars, and they all serve, real purposes that people have for them. And, the car industry didn't just ultimately one day end up with a single, vehicle. Same with, bicycles, right? It's like, it's actually going the other way. There's high performance mountain bikes, there's ultralight road bikes, there's really, robust commuter bikes. They're specialized, right? And they're specialized because of physical affordances that, cannot really be subsumed into one extremely smart device. I think there's an overlay there that involves sharing. So you may not need the monster cargo carrying, e-bike every day of the week, but the days you do need it, maybe you can, access that in an app. I think the sharing business model is really, it's really unique, right? And it's really like nobody's quite cracked the code, and I know many of your guests are working on that. But at the end of the day, it seems like it's here to stay, right? And the modes will change, the pricing will change, who's paying for it may change, but that is going to, I think, be with us for a while. And I think it's just going to enable, people to get the mode that they want when they want it to, basically solve their job to be done.
Yeah. I've increasingly kind of realized that I think a lot of it's going to end up as owned. I think shared is going to end up in a kind of like quite highly constrained area, unless we can do something with autonomous where you can end up with the vehicle outside where you need it, and it feels to me. I was I met the head of Lime for Australia and New Zealand last night for drinks because he was in town, and the way that their business has evolved is they are, they're going to bid on the thing for the next little, 5-year contract, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're never going to win an entire city anymore. That's not the way that's not going to play out. And so it will be increasingly like, I see those as being, like the equivalent of getting like a bus contract or something like this. And I have higher hopes for us as an industry in terms of what we can do. I think the exciting thing will come in the new vehicle form factors. So I think it's the what can we do with e-mopeds or vehicles that are slightly larger, and then how can we start to reclaim the streets and say, look, this is just a better option. It's going to be way cheaper on a per kilometer basis. We are going to work out how to get these to you, and it'll be, as you say, that mixture of kind of owned and shared. And I think most people will. I hope. Own their own.
Yeah, I think people will, definitely own. I mean, what we see, right, with Onewheels is that people want to own them, and then they want to customize them, and they really want them to be a matter of personal pride, right? We sell all different colors of, fenders and bumpers and components you can put together and, preview what it looks like on our website, and then, but then also put your stickers on it and make it yours. And like, I don't really want to ride your Onewheel. I want to ride my Onewheel because it's like set up just the way I want it, And so I think there is the pride of ownership, personalization aspect, which is, really a key for people. And then, and then there are some use cases for shared, right? Like travel or special purpose vehicles or things like that, where I think, that will be, an excellent model. So I think it's going to be both.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, well, look, we're running up against time, but I just want to say this has been phenomenal. You're such an interesting character in this space, and it's a total joy to have a chance to kind of unpack that with you. And thank you to Sean also for helping connect us up. For folks who want to track you down and find out a bit more about you, where would they do that, Kyle?
So they should go to onewheel.com. They should go to @onewheel on Instagram. It's probably our main social media, and or @rideonewheel on Twitter.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you in the Bay Area for Micromobility America, and then hopefully having you back on the show at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Find yourself a Onewheel to go try, and I'm
totally.
Sure you'll join our ranks.
I'm looking forward to doing this. I'm resolved. So I'll let you know what I think.
Absolutely.